Well, it has ticked over into 1:35, so I think we probably can start. And what a great group of people to be talking with today. So welcome everybody for being here, the C3P event. And of course, I begin by acknowledging that we meet on country. And I acknowledge all the different countries that we're from and the countries that we're all meeting on today. The writers of this project live, think and write on the land country and the sea country of the Wodi Wodi, Dharawal and Yuin people. And we bring many other places and spaces, experiences and cultures into the conversation as well. We acknowledge and pay respects to the people, places, cultures, communities and continuing histories of all of these places. I'm speaking on the behalf of the five of us writers because I'm the bossy one. But I also want to stress that I am just a spokesperson for today. We really do need to acknowledge the crucial work done by Luke Johnson for his work as guest editor on this issue of Ireland, for finding a home for our writing, and by bringing it also into conversation with many other writers who are also thinking about water. I also want to acknowledge Kath McKinnon for giving us a framework for working last year when she introduced the project, Things We Want to Know But Forget to Ask, which I think was one of the ways in which we started thinking about working together as writers, writing alongside each other. And I'd also really want to thank and acknowledge Chrissy Howe and Shady Cosgrove for their vital work as editors and provocateurs in the way in which they've kind of generously pushed us in lots of different directions. All of our skills have been extended and enhanced by writing together and writing alongside each other. In his introduction, Luke adapts Heraclitus's famous statement, "No one steps into the same river twice," to suggest that it's always the same river. It's the one which flows through us and into all of us. And in another poem included in this issue, Wiradjuri poet Uran Ellis says, "My country is an in-breath whose out-breath is a sigh." And part of what he's talking about there is a sadness, but I think there's also a generosity that comes with breathing as well. So it heartens me to breathe with, walk with, write with, and swim with all of my colleagues, and to breathe, walk, and write, and swim, and Zoom with you today. It also gives me great pleasure to introduce David Carlin, who's a wonderful friend and a great human being. David is co-director of the Non-Fiction Lab research group at RMIT's School of Media and Communications, where he is Professor of Creative Writing. His books include The After Normal, brief alphabetical essays on a changing planet, co-written with Nicole Walker, which won the Rose Medal Press, came from Rose Medal Press in 2019. The Abyssinian Contortionist and Our Father Who Wasn't There are two of his other amazing books. He's also one of the authors of 100 Atmospheres, Studies in Scale and Wonder. So thank you for agreeing to be our respondent today, David. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Okay. Thank you so much for being here today and for starting the conversation with us. So what's going to happen today is I'm going to throw over to David. David's going to lead the conversation at the beginning of this, and then we'll have some space for all of us to be able to talk at the end of this as well. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Joshua. And I'll just, like to acknowledge too that I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country down here in the land of the Carlin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. Yeah, it was great to get the invitation and the chance to read the edition of Ireland. And I guess what I'm bringing mostly, I think, is my curiosity today. And so I thought I just want to ask some questions really to tease out from the writers a bit more about what they were doing and why, and what they make of it. So I wondered if I could first of all, just before kind of talking about each of the pieces and getting each of the writers to kind of give us a taste of their piece, to maybe ask you first, Luke, as the editor, a little bit, just to talk briefly about your editorial intention with the journal. And one of the things I picked up on from your introduction, and Joshua's already just mentioned this then, was that that one of your intentions as a group was to turn writing from what as you call it, a potentially solipsistic activity into something more collaborative, more communal, more ecologically tuned, a project against individualism and also against existential anxiety. So I guess I'm curious to find out how did that play out?
Thanks, David. Thanks for the question. To start with, the existential anxiety is still there. Rest assured, it didn't go away with this project. The notion of coming a group, I mean, I certainly can't take credit for that. I don't believe that I was the one who originally suggested we should all get together and talk about doing a writing project together. As Joshua alluded, that may have been Kath. I actually have no idea who said, let's meet up at Wollongong Surf Lifesaving Club. But it was a good idea. I think one of the things that grew out of this project was a sense of the relationship between us as writers and the kind of work that we were doing. So something like water, I suppose, is a pretty good medium to be working with because everyone has a water story. You know, I can think back to an event that was held at the Wollongong Surf Lifesaving Club, perhaps the year before, where the Blue Ecologies, at least that phrase kind of entered into my vocabulary anyway, where we broke off into two groups. And I was in a group where we were asked to talk about our experiences with water. I remember Chrissy talking about giving birth to her daughter in a bathtub. And I remember how quickly I came up with my own water stories that I'd never kind of considered before, none of which ended up in this issue of Ireland. But it was apparent to me that this was good fodder for thinking through some of the bigger pictures or looking to make connections in places that we don't normally go searching, I suppose, or at least I don't normally. So my intention with the editorial was really to try to encapsulate what I thought was already happening. The biggest challenge for me in writing the editorial, I've got to be honest, was not Joshua had already written the equivalent of an editorial because we performed these works at Wollongong Writers Festival. And he had introduced us in a really brilliant manner. And the biggest challenge I had was not sort of just plagiarizing him and taking everything that he'd already said and trying to pass it off as my own. But I suppose, again, going back to that notion of this being good fodder, there were, it didn't take a whole lot of looking to find commonalities or to find the spirit of what we were doing metaphorized through the medium of water. I don't know how well that answers your question. Did it answer it?
Yeah, that's a good intro. I'll come back to you in a little while. Yeah, maybe if I can turn to you now, Chrissy, since your essay comes first out of these 5 in the book. Where is your country? And yeah, it strikes me that your essay is about how experience is always mediated through images, stories, maps, archives, memories, etc. And it's also about the nature of virtuality, or perhaps the interplay between virtuality and actuality. You know, with the starting with the picture in the lounge room, and you say you're on a quest to discover you said you're on a quest to discover the virtual flow of the Murrumbidgee, and at the end you also talk, you know, in that beautiful final paragraph about how all of the other memories of your environment in Wollongong kind of flow through when the image of that of the Murrumbidgee meeting the Murray. So yeah, I just wondered if you could talk a bit about your intention with the piece and around these questions of virtuality and actuality, if they make sense to you as terms, and the kind of the key concept of flow.
Yes, just hold on. I'm just going to shut the window because this bus is going past.
Excellent.
Sorry, it was so quiet until like...
We couldn't hear it anyway.
30 seconds ago. So virtuality and actuality. It's funny because I wasn't actually thinking about that when I set out to write this piece. It kind of happened, and the reason it happened that way was because what I was writing about was the Murrumbidgee meeting the Murray, and I realised halfway through writing it that I actually had never been there. I mean, you'd think you'd know that anyway, but it struck me that I really didn't know exactly what that place looked like. And if I wanted to write about it, well, then I'd have to find out information about that place from other sources. And of course, I went to, I Googled it. And so that kind of process of finding out information about a place that I'd never been to from a screen, and then incorporating all of that data, I suppose, into this piece kind of made me think a little bit about the way that so much of our world is currently being destroyed in various different ways, and how the destruction that most impacts me is the destruction of places that I'm intimately connected with. So the Wallagoot Lake, I guess, image at the end of the piece is a place that I feel really intimately connected to. And the moment when I was going through and, looking at the Murrumbidgee and realising that there were all of these fish kills, and I'd already known about them, but I hadn't realised the scale of them. And I had this moment of thinking, oh, thank goodness the places I love are safe. And then I suddenly thought, actually, hold on a minute. And I did a bit more Googling and realised that, yeah, there's that snapper fish kill at Wallagoot Lake around about the same time as the Murrumbidgee Murray fish kills. And I just burst into tears. And it was this moment of realising, that destruction that impacts me really, really deeply with these places that I feel intimately connected with is just as significant, but I don't feel it in the same way. And so I suppose that's really what I'm kind of exploring in that piece, is how I can bring that place that I love and that feeling and that kind of real desire to protect that place into my understandings of places where I haven't been and places that I don't have an intimate connection with, but trying to gather those feelings from the places that I do feel intimately connected with, and think about those other places in that way. Sorry, that was a huge...
No, that wasn't... and so I'm just curious as to why you chose... Why did you want to write about that particular site? Since you'd never been there, you had no connection to it. So what drew you to it?
Yeah, sure. So two things. One thing is this. So that's the painting.
Oh, that is so different from what I expected.
And we bought it from Arunga in the tunnel in Sydney that runs underneath Central Station, so between Central Station and Broadway, and he was busking. And yeah, we bought this painting from him years ago, like, I don't know, maybe nearly 18 years ago, I think. So that, I've had that kind of sitting in my lounge room. And then the fish kills, I heard about the fish kills. And so those two things together made me want to learn, or to write about, where the Murrumbidgee meets the Murray, and then also to write about the fish kills as well.
And so you're talking, in a sense, about kind of issues of care, aren't you? Like,
Yeah.
and empathy, if you can have, empathy for things that we're not intimate with. This problem of ecological catastrophe, where we, how do we care? How do we find ways to care about things that seem a long way away? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. That was much more concise. Thanks.
No. So do you want to just, can you just read us a little, give us a little taste?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just read the beginning of it. Two of Australia's most iconic rivers, the Murrumbidgee and the Murray, meet in my lounge room. They've been there for so long I tend not to notice anymore. The artist's name is Orunga, and the rivers traverse a 22 by 12 centimetre plywood rectangle, black acrylic lines following the contours of his mother's country, land, river, sky. I've never stood at the junction of the Murrumbidgee and the Murray. Unlike the coastal estuaries I grew up alongside, I don't know the smell or texture of the air, the shape of river gum limbs, the bird calls. Because the joining of these rivers takes place day after day above our fireplace, to me they've become more mythical than real. So it comes as a shock when one day one of these rivers actually appears. We're just outside Canberra when it happens, heading towards the Tidbinbilla Ranges, making bets about whether the thermometer in our car will drop below zero as we pass frost-encrusted paddocks and road workers in beanies and high-vis jackets. We dip down a reedy embankment and an innocuous road sign announces that we're just about to cross the Murrumbidgee. I'm ridiculously excited. My daughter, who is 7, begins bouncing up and down in her too small booster seat, yelling, "The Murrumbidgee, the Murrumbidgee!" After we've crossed the bridge, she asks, around a mouthful of almonds, "What's the Murrumbidgee?" I do my best to explain the significance of this river, but I don't do a very good job. I'm trying to navigate at the same time, and instead of zooming out on Google Maps to see where the next intersection is, I'm zooming in on that tiny blue line we just crossed, watching it wriggle down from the snowies towards Gundagai, Wagga, Narrandera, Griffith, Hay. Eventually it will meet the Lachlan, the Murray, pass through the almond plantations of Mildura and join the Darling. On the map, the Murrumbidgee is a small intestine, pastel blue, looping towards the large intestine marking the border between New South Wales and Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you, Chrissy. Joshua, if I can just invite you in now to the conversation. Your piece in the volume is a poem.
Yes, it is.
But it, I detected that. But it too is concerned with flow and scale and grief and the entangling of the human and the more than human, the global and the local, which I believe are all kind of recurrent concerns of yours in one way or another. But here I thought that the poetic form gives us a sense of kind of breathless, unstoppable flow across the stanzas and through the cascading form of the text across the page. So I wondered, because you write in other forms, you're not just in poetry. So I'm curious for you to talk a little bit about what in particular you wanted to investigate with this work. What were you trying to do?
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting for me. I think I like writing in lists, and I think that whether it's prose or poetry, I just like creating lists of images that go on top of each other. And this one seemed to work in a kind of poetic list form because it was about the kind of relentlessness of things in the ocean, whether things dying in the ocean, things thrown into the ocean, bodies being in the ocean. And one of the things that I was trying to do with the stanza breaks was that there, in a sense, there are multiple ways in. So I have a line which says an ocean full, and then all the next stanzas begin with an of, so they all could be the potential end of that sentence. And so I suppose what I was trying to do was to look at the ways in which all the different aspects of our engagement with the ocean are connected with each other. So when I'm diving into the pool, I'm actually having it. That's implicated with coral bleaching or sea level rise or the way in which we import and export goods. So it's about the fact that everything kind of flows into each other. So the fact that I've got sort of many different ways of moving into arranging the list around was a way of saying that rubber ducky in my bath is the same rubber ducky, which is the containers of ocean liners going through, bringing bodies. And then this year with the Ruby Princess moored outside Wollongong in the ocean, it brought another kind of aspect to that, which I thought I might revisit if I ever wrote a different stanza. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So I'm really curious about lists myself. So can you just talk a bit more about why you like lists? Why you like write as a as a writing mode? What are
Yeah,
lists? What are lists? What are the affordances of a list?
one of the great thing about lists is that they do draw connections to each other, because they're all part of they, you know, they could be very just different things, but because they're in the list, they all relate to the person making the list or the themes that are being created there. So I really like that. I like the fact that it allows for connections to be made. I also like the kind of relentlessness of them, that you can keep adding and adding and adding. And that's terrible when we think about, you know, in Flight of Birds, I have the list of extinct birds. So lists can be a kind of relentless sense of grief, but they can also be, I can't remember the play that I saw at Belvoir earlier in the year, Every Brilliant Thing. It's this amazing play where somebody's listing all the great things that happened as part of their life. So lists can also be a kind of a celebration of all the good things in that space. So I like that idea that it's always added to, and you're always engaging with more and more and more, and the relentlessness of that, I think.
Yeah, and something, I think the thing I like about them too is the kind of heterogeneity of them. You know, that they can bring in a lot of things which you might otherwise not think could go together, or, you know, within a tighter narrative form.
Yeah, and they're a beautiful diary as well. I mean, if you look at the shopping list for each week, and I mean, I have a book that has all this last week's shopping, and I go, oh, I remember that week I was cooking these things, or I was on a frenzy of trying to make licorice, so I bought all these silly things that I wouldn't have bought before, or whatever. So there's something nice about that idea of they can track a story, but they don't need to do it with all the kind of extra bits. They're just the kind of rawness, the raw data of that story, which I really love. Yeah.
All right, will you share us a little bit of your
Yes.
poem?
I will. I thought what I would do is just read the last two stanzas, but I'll do the link phrase so that you kind of get the idea of it. So there's the beginning of the poem is, in a foaming bath, drifting from scalding to lukewarm to wrinkling cold, trying to fathom a body of water, a body in water, an ocean full of messageless bottles, half crushed, corrugated, degraded, technicolor grains of plastic, tangled jellyfish bags, tumble turning in the swell, the carcass of an albatross, nylon ropes unthreading, a rubber tire, a lackluster hat with smear brown sweat stains, a single shoe, laces tentacling, a bathtub for mollusks, a packing case, barnacled, bellied up, waterlogged books, the text illegible, a purgatorial vortex of jar lids and golf balls and shampoo bottles, labels faded and peeling, the corroded pain of fractured coral limbs, bits of cryptic sponge, the detritus of pearl, the thinning carapace of an oyster, a swarm of seaweed, a sea sorrow of decay, sweltering in a bath of murky water, phytoplankton gasping, a sigh, a cry, a surging sewer, the sticky sediment of phosphate, a body wash of silt, blooms of oil, diesel spit, a red raw gargle, a chemical peel as the ocean's vitals churn down the pH scale from limestone to salad dressing to a crumpled can of Coke, a salinity anomaly, leftover film of soap on wrinkled skin, and a duck, acid faded, coming up for air. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Shady Cosgrove. Hi, Shady. Haven't seen you for ages.
Hello, how are you, David?
I'm good, yeah. Your piece, Tour of Grief, More Grief.
Yes.
So
Yes.
if Joshua's poem starts with a body in a bathtub and Chrissy's essay starts with gazing at a familiar picture in a lounge room, your essay starts on the beach near Wollongong.
Absolutely.
And with the mind traveling across the Pacific as well as back in time to your childhood home.
Mm.
And I love it when you say the present follows the currents to the past. So bring in that the sense of a temporal flow across a life. So you plunge us into the heartbreaking, mysterious story of the grieving mother orc J35, who's pushing her dead baby through the ocean for 17 days on end. It was so awful to read about. I felt like I learned so much just in the short essay about the plight of the orcas, which I realised I was completely clueless about, their relations with the Chinook salmon and with the Lobb Nation, amongst other things. but it seemed to me you were focused on the conundrum of trying to imagine the grief and the motivations of another species. And at the same time, one of my favorite lines is where you say, how does the emigrant sleep at night? So can you talk a bit about the inquiry that drove this essay for you?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I was inspired originally by, we'd been set a theme and I had to think about themes, and I was like, water, like, what? Oh. And so unlike Luke, I didn't feel like a kind of a rain, like all of these ideas raining down on me. It was kind of the opposite, in fact. And I was like, I don't, you know, like I have a partner and he used to work for the water board. And I was like, I mean, like, I think about water a lot, like, you know, and potable water. And so what was interesting is this just kind of kept morphing. And at one stage, I wasn't even sure it was going to be about water. And I thought, oh, that's going to be very awkward, you know, if it's, you know, but I think.
Could have been about the color blue, maybe.
But then it kept coming back to me, and it was that idea, and the Jeanette Winterson actually with Bridges Join, but they also separate, that water can be a bridge, it can be a distancing tool, but also a bridge. And then just this story of the poor orca that just has kept coming back to me and haunting me. And the idea that when I was back in the States and this was going on, everybody was on tenterhooks. And so there was this interesting situation where, you know, like you could, the cashier, you know, at the supermarket would be like, well, you know, she's still going, you know, like there was this sense that everybody, this kind of everybody was poised. And then it was interesting to come back here. Nobody knew about J35. And so there was kind of an interesting contrast that set up. And I think also in terms of, you know, the immigrant sleeping at night, it's like that I feel this in particularly right now with the US elections going on, in terms of what is my responsibility to homeland. Like I very clearly in my 20s was like, Medicare, why would I ever go back to the United States? You know, gun laws, why would I ever go back? But that in doing that, you're not fighting the good fight in the places where it needs to, you know, so that idea of responsibility and, you know, what is my responsibility to J35? So those were a number of the things that I was kind of working through. And I mean, we don't want to get too excited yet. We know the story doesn't always end well, but J35 Tahlequah is pregnant again. So that would be lovely if things worked out better for her. Otherwise, it's just going to be too traumatic for me to, you know, part two. So I don't know if that answers your questions, David, but those were the things that I was kind of thinking about and grappling with.
Yeah. J35 is such a sort of a cold and clinical name, isn't it, for her?
Yeah, but then, I mean, it was interesting that she was then given the name Tahlequah, which is a very specific point where I've spent a lot of time, you know, and kind of have dear friends and boyfriends in high school that lived in Tahlequah. So then there was this interesting thing where it was almost like, you know, this kind of place that embodies the past going through this experience in the water, so that there was this interesting connection, you know. And I think as an immigrant, that sense of here and there and where I've come from versus where I live and those kinds of issues kind of coming up, they were all at the forefront. And
just so that's, yeah, and just interesting to me, the connection of responsibility with that. Like when you say, what is my responsibility, you know, can you talk a bit more about how, you know, do you feel responsible here to this, to the waters here, or the you know, your environment here in a different way, or?
Well, I mean, that's just quite clear cut and obvious. It's like, you live here, of course you're responsible where you are. But I think it's that idea that there's so much distance between where I grew up and where I am now. And that, you know, if I hadn't have happened to have been there right when her plight was going on, I would be like most of the Australians I know that had no idea about her. And so that idea that something so fundamental where it's not even what you owe her, but it's knowing that you owe her something, you know, that idea of my own ignorance was one of the things that I found quite confronting. And I don't know if there's any answers because we only have so many hours. So I try to keep up with things, and you write letters and make submissions, but, you know, I'm making submissions about the, you know, the horrible academic, you know, legislation going through right now. And then you're J35 and you're just like how do you balance all of the things that are demanding attention, worthy things?
Yeah. So it's a bit like going back to what Chrissy was talking about with the that notion of like economies of care or ecologies and ecologies of care. You know, how we're all kind of facing this all the time as to how much care have we got that we can, and where to place it in our relationships. Yeah. Do you want to read a little bit of yours?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you. And thank you for your questions. I was like, oh, I wonder where David's going to take this. Okay. In her novel, The Passion, Jeanette Winterson reminds us that bridges join, but they also separate. The water connects and separates Wollongong, where I live now, from the small island in the Puget Sound, where I grew up in the United States. At North Beach, skydivers whoop overhead, the sand grips my toes, and swimmers laze between the flags just beyond the breaks. The beach where I grew up was rocky, freezing cold even in the middle of summer, and stacked with driftwood. And yet, those waters are connected. The present follows the currents to the past. South Equatorial meets North. The last time I was on Vashon Island, Mother Orca J35 kept her dead baby for 17 days, pushing the body with her head through the water for over 1,000 miles. The orcas are specific to the region, and there are only 75 left across 3 pods. J35 was just north of me, where Canadian and American waters meet, and news reports documented her path daily. Researchers worried she wasn't eating with the effort of keeping the 500-pound, 227-kilogram baby afloat, diving down and drawing it back to the surface when it began to sink. Other members of the pod eventually took turns, helping with the physical labor of keeping the dead whale on the surface of the water. J35 is also the name of the southern point of the island where I come from. It's where you catch the ferry from Vashon to Tacoma, a port city south of Seattle. Inhabited originally by the Puyallup people who lived in settlements on the Delta, it was the site of a smelter with a strong Union history. It's also struggled with corruption, and the parallels with Wollongong aren't lost on me. It was on that ferry run between Tahlequah and Tacoma that I last saw a pod of orcas. I was in high school, coming home from an athletics meet, desperate to escape the yelling and bustling students on the bus. I climbed the stairs to the passenger level and stood outside on the deck, listening to my Walkman as dusk settled over the water, the outline of Mount Rainier fading into the evening clouds. And there, just behind the boat, the slow, unassuming progress of dorsal fins rising and falling. They were crossing in our wake, moving like a chorus, one, then another, keeping time and tracking distance, black creatures in swirling black water with only the tiniest underside of white visible in the quiet light.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Kath, most of it is water.
Hi.
Hi. This is such a beautiful piece, and one of the things I most enjoyed about it was its fluidity of form and genre. It looks like a poem, and so I began reading it as if it were a poem. But then pretty soon, when you become aware of it, well, I became aware of it as being like a dramatic monologue. But I also, early on, particularly, I could read it as memoir, and particularly because I know, I'm pretty sure you have a sister called Josie, and then that only sort of made it more intriguing as it developed into something more and more dramatic and fictional, with the very immediate physicality of the the rescue and the drowning scene, and then with the twist at the end. So I was just really interested, because I'm not sure if that was important to you in writing it, that kind of playful relation to form and genre, and thinking about kind of readerly expectations, and the sense of that kind of sense of fluidity and flow within the piece. So yeah, do you want to talk to that and talk a little bit, if that wasn't what was on your mind, then what you were interested in exploring through this piece?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think I didn't mean it to be a poem necessarily. I just wrote it as a dramatic monologue. And I was thinking we were all talking about water and different approaches. And I was interested in trying to do something about the rivers. There was a story about a young girl who came out and was trying to fight for the rivers in her town. And I kind of looked at that story, and I didn't want to, Chrissy was writing a story about the rivers too, and I didn't want to kind of cross over. So I was kind of looking around for what to do. And I mixed a little bit. It's interesting that you say memoir, because I mixed a little bit of things that had happened with this thing about the rivers, the river in a small town. So I imagined a small town, and in fact it's an imaginary cross between a country town in New South Wales and the River Torrens in Adelaide. And I sort of merged those two together. And that event that's in the story actually happened to me when I was young. And I merged that with, at about the age of 15, and I merged that with the situation of two of my friends at that age, one close friend and one just a girl in my class, both got pregnant, which was a big thing because it was a Catholic girls' school. So it was this huge thing. And so I suppose I was just thinking about that age group that was stirred by this reading about this young girl in the country town who was fighting for her river. And then I just don't really know how it came together. It's just you start writing and all those different things are in your mind. But I wanted to write about, you know, in the background of it all was climate change, but writing about it through the experience of being young and trying to embrace the world. So this idea of death, and yet, you know, life coming, always coming again, always being born again, and life being regenerated, and just at that cusp. And this idea that we are so full of water and that we can sometimes feel the weather coming on. And we wonder about that. And yet, you know, it's like our bodies are so much water. So just nothing really so conscious other than just responding to the people I was talking to about this idea of what's happening in our climate, and trying to create a story that might relate in some way.
I'm just conscious of the time, but I think, because I think I'd love to kind of ask you a follow-up question, but maybe I'll better not for now. And maybe just, do you want to just give us a little taste of your piece?
I'll just give a little taste. Summer, hot night, the river, walking by the river, three of us, Josie, Lily Rose and me, talking, always talking. A text to Mum to say we're having pizza. She hates us going to the river, day or night. She thinks there's a rapist behind every tree. There's not. And if there was, safety in numbers. And if there was, we're not stupid. Some crazy barcode attacks us, we kick him in the balls and run. We're smart. I'm smart. There's things we don't know, things I don't know, like what will happen tomorrow. My grandma's a hippie still. Mum's the opposite. Say the word sex and she jumps. 9 to 5, as Grandma calls my olds. They are old, and they have no idea what I get up to. Dad says these days the river is biblical. Downstream, dead fish floating. Yellow water, not blue. Someone wants to plant willows, clean it up, Old Mr. Brown says, willows are weeds. Downstreamers say there are weeds and there are weeds. They're arguing about it still, and about other things, about how our part of the river flows and downstream it doesn't, about how we're taking more than our share. There was a big blow up at the council meeting. Dad was there. I wrote it up for Miss Wilson's science essay. Miss Wilson is an actual human, like a good one. She says I should send my essay to Science Geeks Online. I'm thinking about it. Lily Rose is ranting about dams and water, and the poem that we did in class where one of the good girls wrote, "We are water." She was trying to be poetic. I had to tell her it's a fact. We are water. A man is 60%, a woman 55%. Babies, yeah, babies are like 75%. That's a lot of water. I think I might study science when I leave school, maybe. I stop and look up at the night sky and see clouds racing, deep purples and crimson. A storm is coming. I'm thinking, yeah. I'm thinking, how amazing. The weather, the energy of it. It's the shifts that blow my mind.
Thank you. So last but not least, Luke, Little Proud. So in Little Proud's another interior monologue, but this time a satiric monologue. And I wondered if that's one question for you, is whether you think of it as being satire or how you think of it in terms of the humour. David Littleproud, the Minister for Water Resources and etc., the most regional of ministers, a minister in the midst of a rally paraded down the street by an angry mob, strapped to the crapper, as you say most memorably, and finally deposited in the river. So I don't know your other work, Luke. So I'm really interested in finding out a bit more about like what's the tradition that you're drawing upon stylistically and in making the choice of this this particular form of the kind of satiric monologue.
Yeah, that's not a bad question. My history, I suppose, this is left of field. This is not really like anything that I've ever written before. And I don't think it's like anything I'll ever write again, to be quite honest. It was fun while it lasted, but I don't have any ambitions of becoming a satirical monologist. That's not where I think my future lies. The traditions that I kind of was consciously appropriating, the books that I was reading as I was writing this, were picaresque kids' books. The Magic Pudding, foremost. I was trying to emulate the Magic Pudding. The original Pinocchio, the original Pinocchio stories, these kinds of things. And I was trying to cram as many references to kind of childish texts in this as possible, because for me there was a bit of fun, or there was something interesting about the juxtaposition of an inherently important and grown-up affair, as befits national politics, and the sort of childish rhetoric or the sort of childish behaviour that we often see within political arena. So I suppose I was trying to draw attention to those sorts of things. That answered one part of your question. I can't remember there was another part to it. I'm sorry, I forgot.
No, I think it was mostly. I think you have answered it very well, actually. Yeah. So Joshua, rather than me asking another question of everyone, shall we throw it open and see if anyone else wants to ask a question at this point?
Yeah, I think so. It's such a pity we could go on for much longer than this. But yeah, we do have some time for
Gonna read?
Yeah, Luke needs to read first. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was perfectly happy to let that.
No, Luke, you've got to do it.
Thank you, Kath and Shady.
Yes, so as David mentioned, anyone that hasn't read it yet, this is a monologue narrated by the effigy of David Littleproud. So I epigraphed the work with a couple of quotes which are perhaps worth pointing out here. The first one is dated 7 July 2016, and that's roughly when David Littleproud entered Parliament. And this was the quote that he gave at the time. This wasn't my ultimate aim in life, but politics is all about timing and opportunity. The opportunity came up and I grabbed it with both hands, and lo and behold, I'm here. That's him announcing his arrival in Parliament. And then roughly 3 years later, we get this headline in the ABC News. Angry farmers throw effigy of Federal Water Minister David Littleproud sitting on a toilet into the Murray River. So this piece was my attempt to draw a line between those two curiously disparate plot points. And the vehicle of Littleproud's effigy was how I did that. So the reason I'm stalling here is because I have to enter into the persona of David Littleproud's effigy here to read this. So you need to be prepared. I need to go deep inside myself and find my actor. All right. And this was the voice in which the entire piece was written, so I can't read it without reading in this voice. Holy Maranoa, what have I gone and got myself into this time? The Honourable David Littleproud being floated down the main street of Tokemore on a toilet. Wowee, what an unexpected and inexplicable turn of events. I mean, who could have predicted it? That the humble boy from Western Queensland who rose to parliamentary prominence on the back of nothing more than a Year 12 education and a healthy dose of temerity should find himself strapped to the rim of a stainless steel bowl, hitched to the tray of a flatbed truck and paraded through town like a prize ram on show day. Seems like only 10 seconds ago I was sitting in my office up there in the Sunshine State telling my assistant Stacey that I'd rather drink $1 a litre milk from a Woolworths dumpster than accept an invitation to a rabble-rouser like this. And then, poof, here I am riding shotgun on the old Grone Throne right through the centre of town. Well, I tell you what, southern New South Wales might be a long way from sunny Chinchilla, where I grew up enjoying an awesome range of outdoor activities such as cricket, football, swimming, camping and fishing, but I have to hand it to them down here in the Blue State. They sure know how to get their man. And they sure know how to bung on a rally too. Just get a go at this crowd, would you? This is a country crowd, a real salt of the earth of this one. The mums and dads of regional Australia pounding the pavement with their placards and their posters, showing those inner city trendies that you don't need an expensive university degree in advanced marketing to get your message out there. A sheet of cardboard and a magic marker from the local newsagent, and Roberta's your aunt. Irrigation, not ruination. Food bowls, not dust bowls. Royal commissions, not politicians. Absolute poetry in motion it is. One of the very reasons I got into politics in the first place too, to help bring a voice to regional Australia. Real regional voices voicing real regional choices. Because this is what my coalition counterparts back up there in the nation's capital don't get about regional Australia. That you can defy the laws of science by instantaneously teleporting a bloke halfway across the country, ratchet strap him to a toilet, taunt him with derisive rhymes about his involvement in an increasingly contentious piece of bipartisan legislation, and still be BFFs at the end of the day. Or should I say BRFFs, best regional friends forever.
Yeah.
That's it, that's the performance. So out of character, end scene.
That voice, Luke, is quite extraordinary.
It's part of me now, Joshua. That's part of my.
No, I know. We know it's unfortunate. We'll have to do a baptism or exorcism in the water to get it out of you.
At any time, yeah.
Maybe before we just open up to I'll just float on sort of float out there the three questions that I had, and so anyone might want to pick up any of them, or someone else might want to pitch in a question. So one of the questions was about going back to that the question of collaborative practice and collaborative writing, and to ask all of you, what difference did this make to do this in this collaborative setting rather than just to be doing these pieces individually? What are the affordances and limitations of collaborative practice? The second question was, what do minor pieces do for you? These are you're all kind of people who work on bigger projects, and so in some sense these seem to me to be all kind of incidental or minor pieces, and so I'm kind of curious about that. What's the possibility that the minor, the notion of the minor piece affords? And then the third question that any of you could choose to look at if you wanted to is, is, do you consciously think in terms of creative practice research when you're doing this kind of work? You know, do you think, I'm not sure if these are things that you're thinking of in terms of being NTROs, but yes, that question of whether how conscious you are of them as being research while you're making them. So I'm just going to throw all of those against the wall, and there might be other questions that people have as well. Joshua.
The first one's interesting. The first one I think is interesting, because we've worked. Lots of us have worked collaboratively, closely working on the same text. But this idea of working parallel, or working alongside each other, or working in the same space, I think is just as valuable. We've got 5 really different pieces here, and it was amazing this time to hear the differences in the excerpts, but they also speak to each other, and we because they were being produced at the same time, there's echoes in that place. And the differences also enhance what we're doing, I think, because suddenly you get a comic version of the grief that you're playing with, or you get a different, or a national or an international version of an idea that you're thinking about, which I think also enhances and complicates things. So that's how I would answer the first question, I think. But the team might want to respond differently.
I think with that first question, for me, the value lies in responsibility, and that suddenly you have a responsibility to 4 other people. These are, I suppose, writing, when I talk about it being a solipsistic activity, I think that often provides an excuse, not at least if my Dropbox is anything to go by, not to finish pieces or not to continue with them. But as soon as it becomes part of a group project, it's not just your own work that you're not finishing, it's somebody else's work that you're not pulling your weight on or finishing. So there was value in that for me.
Shady's unmuted.
Oh, I was interested in the idea about kind of the minor works with major works, and kind of at a place where I've just been pushing through with a big project. I find it gives me energy to keep going. Like the big projects can be too consuming, or if they're not going well, so I find the combination of doing something smaller and doing it with other people so that you don't feel quite so isolated during the creative process is just incredibly useful from a survival vantage.
Kath.
I think I remember we were on the beach doing some work together, and Chrissy had said, let's do another project together. And so we beach, and we were chatting, and then I was telling Joshua that I was going to write, or maybe Luke, I think I was going to write these monologues, and Luke said, oh my God, too many monologues. And Joshua said, let's all write them, and I said, really? And he kind of offered everyone up. And so it was not thinking about research in that way, but just we were being together is my memory, and we were thinking of writing together, that we've often done as a sort of companionship, but with an outcome. And I guess the outcome is for a minor work, for era or for work, but it's never my main motive, and I don't know if it's anybody else's. It's partly a way, like Shady was saying, of just between the big projects, keeping work ticking along and keeping working and talking together about our work. And I do also remember at one stage, Joshua bringing up and saying that it's good that we work together when we're in such a shit environment, basically, and everything's going wrong. We still get back to the writing. And I think that's been a thing that's sort of been thrown over a few times in the last couple of years, that at least we can write together and talk together why everything else seemed to be falling apart.
Chrissy, did you want to add anything to the...
Yeah, sure. I probably wouldn't have written that piece if we hadn't have done this project, and that would be sad for me. Like, I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to talk together, and we had a couple of different meetings where we went walking and talking, and the pieces kind of developed out of that. And I don't know whether any of us would have written exactly what we wrote if we hadn't have had those meetings. So that even though the pieces are really different, they would not have emerged had we not done this together, which I think is really quite beautiful. And in terms of the research, even though this, like, I'm talking about my piece, just because I'm speaking for myself here, but even though it's a short piece, there was a lot of research that went into that, which you might not notice from reading it, but I went down several rabbit holes. I read a lot of Charles Sturt's, diaries, and did a huge amount of research, some of which went into that and some of which might go into something else. But to me, it's definitely a research project, even though it's a small one or a minor one, but it definitely is drawing on a number of different things. And I'm thinking through a number of different things in a particular form, and I'm kind of hoping that depth of thought comes through in it.
Yeah, I feel the same. Where creative research is concerned, this is definitely the piece that has required the most capital R research from me, the most reading in order to bring the piece together. And at times it's probably the coming together of the voice and that allowed for the form, because there's some really quite overtly research sections throughout the story where I'm essentially just laying down research that I've gathered. So yeah, there was a lot of thought about the way in which form, to kind of piggyback on Chrissy's point there, the way in which form enabled me to present these ideas in a hopefully palatable manner.
It's a contentious word, minor. We had an interesting school meeting where we had quite a big fight about the word minor recently, and I think that it's a good word because you're not doing a big project, but in some sense we're all doing big projects, even when we're writing even if the output is word count small. That I think that we're producing, actually, a microfiction can do something enormous in that space. So I think if we think about these as being part of a larger collection, whether it be our own work or whether it be part of the collection of the five of us, that's a very useful way of engaging with that the formal word of the use of the word minor. But I like the idea of it being I like the idea of saying this is the thing that I'm working on now as a break from that other big scary thing. That's a useful way of thinking about this project. I'm mindful. Sorry, David. You go.
Just really quickly, I suppose I was also mindful of the use of the idea of minor, not in a derogatory sense, but in the sense of the minor literature that Deleuze talks about, and has been taken up by people like Erin Manning, and there's a great book called Minor Feelings, Kathy Park Hong.
Yeah.
So yeah, as a kind of a strategy of resistance in a way.
Yeah, I
like
do see that.
Determinedly minor.
Yeah, and I did. I mean, and the idea of minor, Cassie's put the idea of a minor key is also kind of interesting in that you're playing with variations on a theme that you might be thinking of in a larger context. So yeah, it's a useful word in lots of different ways. I am mindful that we've hit 2:30, and we haven't heard from other people in the room. There were some questions thrown into the chat, but I just wondered if anybody in the room wants to ask a question of the five of us or someone specifically, and then we might. Yeah, Julia, please go. Unmute, please. Unmute, Julia.
Sorry to be slow.
Fine.
I'm going to break the rules if I may, Joshua, because it's just a comment. But
Fine.
But thanks for the gift of today, because, like, as all of you know, I'm such a diehard fangirl of the gongers, as I like to call you, individually and collectively. And I just think the timing of these kind of things, when everyone, especially Melburnians, are probably so sick of Zoom, but it's a gift, and it has reminded me of, of why we do what we do, art generating art, things that you guys in the gong do so well, and thanks to David, because your facilitating powers are kind of sickeningly ace, if I can put it that way. So thank you is my comment. Thanks.
Oh, and possibly that's the way to end today's discussion, if people don't mind. Julia, there she's still here. Julia also edited a collection this year of COVID writing at the point where we were most vulnerable. So I would like to thank you, Julia, for giving us that gift this year. because again, this idea of being able to throw something out and say, here's some space for us to produce work, whatever work it might be, is really gorgeous at this point. I do think we probably have to end it there, which is very sad. I would love to stay in this room forever, but we do need to do other things today. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming today. Thank you to my 4 colleagues, the 4 writers, and thank you very much, David, in particular, for facilitating today. And thank you for the C3P team for letting us have this space. Really, really wonderful, Sue and Lucas and Kath and Travis for organising the technology, and Jen Saunders for rallying the postgrads. Really great to have everybody here today. I think we might leave it there, if that's all right. It's always hard to leave a Zoom room, so what we might do is just quietly leave without anybody needing to worry about the etiquette of it. But I'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Joshua.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Joshua.
See you all.
Take care. Take care. I never leave the room. I always like to chat afterwards, but I should probably leave. Bye. Thanks, Trav. Well, I'll actually leave. See you soon.